Vernon, not at all. In fact, as the previous Chief of Naval Operations, Vern Clark, said, when I was placed in charge of the Navy's $70 billion warfare development program, only 65 corporations across America had a larger market value. I had to balance that budget. And to do so, I said, the Navy's building things wrong. It's, for example, saying we need 55 submarines. The Soviet Union's gone. We don't have any in the Indian Ocean where our submarines were. And so I said, but we need to know where bin Laden is. And so the change of our military to be more efficient and cost-effective has to be done. I stood up in the Navy and did that against opposition of the Rumsfeld administration.
You're going in that direction.
Yes, they've gone from when I was there and said go to 250, 260 ships, but knowledge-based systems, they're about 270 now and coming down. Take, for example, the F-22. Even though some parts of it were built in my district, we have to stop that program. If we have the knowledge of where bin Laden is, another ship at sea, in that case, isn't going to help us. And that's the change that has to be done. And I want to bring that military expertise as the most senior officer ever elected to Congress into the Senate to make sure we do things right and understand warfare and what the budget has to be to have a more cost-efficient, effective military.
Well, my dad's a veteran of the Korean War era. My brother-in-law served 20 years in the Navy. One of the things that's very, very important to me is that we make sure that when we ask men and women to go into harm's way, they have all the resources they need to get the job done. I have always voted to make sure to provide those resources, and I always will. But the fact is, there is waste pretty much everywhere in government, and that includes in the Pentagon. Part of the problem is Congress voting for systems that the Pentagon doesn't even want. Congress has a real serious spending problem, and it manifests itself in many ways. Certainly, wasteful defensive programs occasionally are in that list, but a more egregious example is the practice of earmarks. Earmarks are a terrible abuse of the system, a waste of taxpayer dollars, so often on money spent on things that nobody would spend their own money on. Joe Sestak voted against over 100 consecutive efforts to strip out some of the most egregiously wasteful earmarks, including even $2 million for Charlie Rangel's monument to himself. We're never going to get budgets under control when members of Congress keep piling on pork like that and voting for everyone else's pork.
30 seconds, Congressman.
I'm the only congressman up here who has the piece of legislation to end earmarks. Number two, let me talk about veterans, those we send in harm's way. What I'm most upset about Congressman Toomey about is not just voting against those bonuses for our veterans. He stood there and slashed the Veterans Administration because he called it waste. 1 million veterans who had been covered during the Clinton administration, just made a bit over poverty, were kicked out under your watch. And then they cut it so much, we now had a backlog when I arrived in Congress of 600,000 cases. 600,000 cases for our vets. Look, it isn't just about cutting. We all want to cut. It's where you cut, and that's what's important.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Well, there are just too many dishonest charges for me to refute them all. The website, my website, will give you a chance to see this afterwards. But for Joe to seriously try to pretend that he has any interest in getting spending under control is simply laughable. The stimulus bill included things like $31 million to build a spring training baseball camp for the Colorado Rockies and the Arizona Diamondbacks. $11 million for Microsoft to build a bridge, and Joe Sestak argued that it should have been bigger, should have been $1 trillion. The list goes on, and he voted for all of these earmarks because he got a little pork in it. And in fact, he violated the pledge that he had taken. He had taken a pledge that he wouldn't accept campaign contributions from those for whom he was seeking earmarks. In fact, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that he violated that pledge and took $120,000. This shows you just how corrupt this system is. It really needs to end.
Wendy.
The new documentary, Waiting for Superman, actually I think it's directed to Mr. Toomey. The new documentary, Waiting for Superman, it argues pretty convincingly that the current school system is failing our children and that to compete on the global stage, something is going to have to change. My question is, what could or even what should the federal government do, if anything, about this issue?
Well, you know, And my first thought, of course, goes to my kids. My 10-year-old daughter is just, she's a great student and she works really hard. My 9-year-old son, he much prefers playing outside, but he's a good student. And I've got a 5-month-old, and I obviously have great hopes for him too. You know, we're very fortunate. We can afford the modest tuition of the parochial school that we send our kids to, and we're thrilled with the school that really does a great job meeting the needs of our kids. What I think is absolutely tragic is that other parents who can't afford a private school tuition are trapped so often in schools that are failing their kids, and they have no option. They have no choice. We've got a staggering number of kids in schools in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and in between who really don't have much of a chance in life because they're not getting the education they need. I really think that the money for funding education should follow the child, and parents should have a choice of any school, public or private, religious or non-religious. More choice will be helpful for these kids. A child with a choice can't be worse off than a child with no choice. This movie really illustrates the power of that. Congressman Sestak voted to cut off school choice for kids in the District of Columbia, including kids who were enrolled in these private schools and they were just sent back to the public school that they had tried to get out of. I think that's just a tragedy. It's very important that we make this change for our kids.
My mom's a high school math teacher. I can always remember my pop, an immigrant, sitting there at the table, dinner table, penny for college, penny for food. I fought to get on the education committee because in the military I saw these students come, these sailors come from across this great nation. We'd give them some remedial training, coming some of them from broken school systems. And man, you talk about competition, we made that battle group hum. I believe we have to invest in our youth. Pell Grants, we have doubled by reducing the national debt so lower income could go to college. Early Start, so kids in disenfranchised areas could actually have an opportunity. Congressman Toomey said it well, he could afford it. So in his book he says, let's take all schools and make it like you're shopping for groceries. And what you can afford, that's where you go. We don't distribute brains according to wealth or zip code. Man, I got those youth into our military. Didn't matter their ethnicity, didn't matter their race. You give them a fair opportunity and they're all they can be. Let's fix it. Let's not just throw everything once more on the marketplace.
30 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you hear Joe Sestak opposes giving poor kids a choice of a private school. The teachers union just won't let him go there. But I've seen how powerful it is when a poor child gets a chance to go to a great school. The Imani Christian Academy in Pittsburgh is doing wonderful work with kids who come from some of the most difficult circumstances. And right now there's just too many kids who don't have a chance to go to that school, don't have a chance to go to any working school. And I just think it's unconscionable that we are allowing so many of a whole generation of Americans to have a substandard education. You know, if we gave these kids a choice, if their parents had the opportunity to send them to a school of their choice, the competition would elevate the quality of all schools, and kids would do so much better.
I do